Let's talk about the Middle Ages. We're going to start with Rome's influence on the Middle Ages. So it begins with the idea that Greco-Roman culture is basically what we call classical civilization. So the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans are kind of the foundation of what we think of as Western civilization in like Western Europe. Roman culture and law is going to spread across Western Europe during the days of the empire. That's what happens when you build a massive empire across most of the known continent. We're also going to see the use of Latin as kind of a common language. It's used in legal documents, it's used in the church, it's the language of learning across Western Europe, even after the Roman Empire falls. Additionally, Roman architecture is going to remain very influential across Western Europe. We see the use of arches, domes, concrete all across the continent. France, in Great Britain, in Spain, in Germany. These architectural details remain very common for the next several hundred years. Part of this is because Roman architecture was just very practical and long-lasting. The stuff they built just worked and continued to work until well after the Roman Empire was no longer a thing. One of the key examples of this would be the use of Roman roads. There are still, even today, Roman roads that can be used as an actual road. Rome's law code is also going to serve as the basis for most Western European legal systems, and we see a lot of elements of Roman law pop up in other cultures, other societies. Elements such as laws applying equally to the rich and the poor, the concept of innocent until proven guilty, which goes hand in hand with the notion that the burden of proof is with the accuser. So it's not up to the person being accused of something to prove they didn't do it, it's up to the accuser to prove that you did do it. And the idea that you're punished for your actions, not your thoughts. It's what you do that's important, not what you think. As the Roman Empire collapses, a lot of Germanic tribes move into the old Roman Empire territory and start taking it over in the late 400s. This has a lot of effects, a lot of consequences. First of all, it disrupts trade across the old Western Roman Empire. It's harder to get goods from other parts of Europe because you're probably going to get attacked and murdered by German barbarians. Second of all, we see the destruction of major cities. The city of Rome itself gets sacked like 2 or 3 times by the Vandals and the Lombards and just these other Germanic tribes coming in looking for easy pickings, which Rome has become by the 500s and 600s. And we see a shift in populations to the countryside. People move out of the major cities. Now, during the height of the Roman Empire, people were not really all living in cities. There were a couple of big cities like Rome, but for the most part, people lived out in the countryside. But we see that's the case even more so in this early medieval, or what they call late antiquity time period. Additionally, we see a decline in learning and knowledge. It's harder to go to school. It's harder for people to gain access to knowledge and learning. The German barbarian tribes, as they come in, they burn things that they don't need, which would include books. We also see, because of the disruption in trade, the disruption in major trade routes, the loss of common languages as different parts of Europe become more isolated from each other for a while. So this is where we get the development of new languages, a lot of what we call the Romance languages, so like French and Spanish and Portuguese and Italian and Romanian, the languages that are based out of Latin, based out of Rome, hence Romance languages. It has nothing to do with want to kiss people. So we're seeing the Roman provinces replaced by German kingdoms. Borders are changing constantly, and we're seeing a shift in the way that loyalty works. Under the Roman Empire, loyalty was to the government and to the law. You respected the law, you respected the Roman government. There was a sort of continuity that existed from ruler to ruler. It didn't really matter who was emperor because Rome was eternal. That's going to change. The Germanic tribes have loyalty to a specific leader. If you've got a powerful leader with a powerful army, he's the dude you're following. It's not so much that you're loyal to the Lombards or to the Visigoths or whatever. You're loyal to this particular dude who has a big axe in his hand and will kill you if you don't follow him. Now, we are going to see a lot of German tribes convert to Christianity by the 600s, and that's going to have an impact on the way that they behave. It's going to have an impact on the way they interact with each other. So, let's talk about a few of the major Germanic and other tribes that are kind of running around the area at the time. Of course, we have the Vikings. They're not really Germanic, they're Scandinavian, they're from a little further north. They're sailors, they're warriors, they're adventurers. They begin staging raids and attacks all around Europe. They hit France, they hit Spain, they hit the Mediterranean. They establish colonies in Greenland and Iceland. They attempt to establish a colony in North America but get chased off by Native Americans. These guys are some of the fiercest warriors out there. What's going to eventually cause most of them to settle down is various rulers in Western Europe are going to say, hey, we'll give you some land if you'll stop killing all of us. It's how you get the Normans in northern France. Norman comes from Norsemen, which is what the Vikings called themselves. So it's a way for them to, for the French to protect themselves from these Viking invaders. We also have a Germanic tribe called, two tribes really, called the Angles and the Saxons. These two tribes we usually kind of lump together because they're going to end up both invading the island of Britain in the early 800s, kind of taking over control of most of what is today called England. The name England actually comes from Angleland. It's land of the Angles. It's why we tend to call the people who are in England Anglo-Saxons. It's why we tend to talk about people who love like British culture and British history Anglophiles. They're going to fight against a Danish Viking invasion in the late 800s and manage to defeat the Vikings. But it's a temporary thing because a Danish king named Canute is going to invade in 1016 and conquer most of the Anglo-Saxon territory. Eventually, the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons are going to merge into one group, what we would today call the English. The last Germanic group we need to talk about are the Franks. The Franks are a Germanic group living in Gaul, or modern-day France. One of the most important leaders of the early Franks is a guy named Clovis. He's going to convert to Christianity in 496 after receiving or his wife receives a vision telling him that he should convert to Christianity, and if he does, he'll win this big battle. So he converts, goes out and wins the battle, makes all of his men, get baptized as Christians, and the rest is history. Clovis is important because he's going to unite the Frankish tribes into a single kingdom in 511, and the Franks are going to continue to control France for, the rest of history. It's where the word France comes from, is from the Franks. Now, the last thing we should talk about is Christianity's influence on post-Roman Empire Europe, what we call the late antiquity period. Western Europe becomes mostly Roman Catholic Christian during the Middle Ages. The church is a socially dominant force in Western Europe during that time. Everything that you do is connected in some way, shape, or form to the church. They control everything. They control how you behave. They control what's going to happen to you when you die. It's a very powerful institution. And the leader of the Roman Catholic Church is the Pope. He's the Bishop of Rome. He has all the authority. We also have monasteries, these religious communities where monks are going to live and work, all over Western Europe. They're part church, part fort, basically. The monks that lived inside of them would do work, they would provide services to the community, and probably the most important thing they do is they preserve knowledge. The monks are often copying down books by hand, making, multiple copies of the Bible and a bunch of other important texts. Probably one of the most important monks that we need to talk about is a guy named Benedict. He was an Italian monk who established rules for monastic living in 520. So the Benedictine order is even today one of the major religious orders in the Roman Catholic Church. Benedictine monks are very important and kind of set the tone for how monks would behave and the sort of work they would do. We should also talk about Gregory I, also known as Gregory the Great. He was Pope from 590 to 604. And it's under Gregory that the office of the Pope, what we call the papacy, becomes a secular or non-religious power. So Gregory starts out as just another pope, but then he gets asked to negotiate a peace treaty with the invading Lombard tribe to protect the city of Rome. And in doing so, he raises armies, he collects taxes, and he starts governing the area just around the city of Rome, what's going to become known as the Papal States. And this is a major shift for the Pope. He's not just a religious leader now, he's a political leader. And that's going to make things very interesting in the way that he interacts with the rest of Europe and with Europe's rulers in the decades and centuries to come.